Before the 1970s explosion of visceral horror, the 1960s offered something different. Gothic elegance, psychological suspense, and a final flowering of classical monster movies before everything changed. This was the decade when Hammer films perfected their craft. Italian Gothic discovered Barbara Steele, and British thrillers proved you didn't need supernatural elements to terrify audiences. Tonight we're looking at 10 films from the 1960s that deserve more attention. Castle hauntings and circus deaths, occult battles and werewolf mysteries, psychological gaslight and surgical horror. Some came from Hammer's production line, others from Italian masters working in shadowy black and white, and a few from filmmakers pushing British horror into darker, nastier territory. These aren't the obvious classics everyone knows. They're the films that got overshadowed. The ones that delivered Gothic atmosphere and genuine craft while bigger titles claimed the spotlight. A decade of horror finding its identity before everything splintered into exploitation and excess. Vi, 1967. The first officially sanctioned Soviet horror film adapts Nikolai Gogol's story about Koma, a seminary student ordered to spend 3 nights praying over the body of a young woman who may have been a witch. Each night, supernatural forces become more intense as spirits, monsters, and the imposing figure known as Vi test the limits of Koma's resolve. His only protection is a chalk circle drawn around him, a barrier that becomes increasingly fragile as the nights progress. Directors Konstantin Yershov and Georgy Kropatchev create rich atmosphere within Soviet filmmaking restrictions. The church setting, with its shadows, candles, and heavy iconography, produces genuine tension. The first 2 nights rely on building unease, while the third unleashes a memorable array of practical effects and creature designs that remain impressive today. Leonid Kuravlyov brings a blend of fear, bravado, and exhaustion to Koma, making his unraveling believable. Natalia Varley portrays the young woman in both her living and spectral forms, and the transformation is handled with strong makeup work for the period. The film's finale became one of the most iconic sequences in Eastern European genre cinema. Vi retains a distinct identity by grounding its supernatural elements in regional folklore rather than generic horror imagery, ensuring its place as a landmark of Soviet-era filmmaking. Spider Baby, or The Maddest Story Ever Told, 1967. Jack Hill's offbeat Gothic horror comedy follows the Mary family, who suffer from Mary syndrome, a fictional condition that causes them to regress mentally and physically as they grow older. Lon Chaney Jr. plays their caretaker, Bruno, who protects the 3 remaining Mary children in a decaying mansion while hiding the severity of their condition from outsiders. When distant relatives arrive to claim the estate, their curiosity triggers a chain of dangerous encounters. The film balances unsettling atmosphere with dark humor, never undermining either. The Mary children, especially Virginia, who imagines herself a spider and stalks intruders with blades, come across as both vulnerable and unpredictable. Jill Banner's performance as Virginia is strikingly memorable, and Beverly Washburn and Sid Haig also contribute to the family's eerie dynamic. Chaney delivers one of his strongest late-career roles, portraying Bruno as a man who loves the children, yet knows he's protecting something he no longer fully understands. The opening theme song, sung by Chaney himself, sets a quirky but ominous tone. Shot in black and white, on a tight budget, the film uses its limited setting to great effect, turning the mansion into a character of its own. Due to distribution problems, Spider Baby remained obscure for years, but later festival screenings and home video releases helped it earn a dedicated cult following. It stands as one of the most inventive American Gothic films of the era. The Devil Rides Out, 1968, Hammer Films adapted Dennis Wheatley's occult thriller with rare seriousness. Christopher Lee stars as the Duc de Richelieu, an aristocrat versed in esoteric knowledge who discovers that his young friend has been recruited by a dangerous occult group led by the refined but threatening Macabre. What follows is a struggle against dark forces treated with unusual authenticity. The symbols, rituals, and terminology aren't embellishments but integral plot elements. Director Terence Fisher applies Hammer's classic Gothic style to a story grounded in occult conflict. Lee, unusually cast as the heroic lead, brings intelligence and authority to a character who relies on knowledge as much as courage. Charles Gray's controlled, soft-spoken performance as Mokata makes him one of Hammer's most effective antagonists. The film's standout sequence, the protective circle scene, showcases restrained but effective visual effects as the heroes endure waves of supernatural assaults. Fisher emphasizes atmosphere over spectacle, letting suggestion enhance the tension. Serious in tone and carefully researched, The Devil Rides Out became one of Hammer's most sophisticated productions. It remains a defining example of British occult cinema done with craftsmanship and respect for its subject matter. Scream of Fear, 1961. Hammer demonstrated their skill with psychological suspense in this thriller about Penny, a young woman returning to her father's secluded villa after years abroad. Confined to a wheelchair and still processing old trauma, she becomes convinced she's seeing her father's body hidden around the property, only for it to vanish before anyone else can confirm it. Her stepmother and the family doctor insist she's imagining things, but her discoveries grow more troubling. Director Seth Holt uses the villa's isolated layout to create a constant sense of uncertainty. The film maintains a careful balance between psychological tension and traditional mystery, leaving viewers unsure whether Penny is uncovering a conspiracy or losing her grip on reality. Susan Strasberg gives the lead role vulnerability and determination, grounding the story emotionally. Christopher Lee appears in a rare, sympathetic role as the chauffeur who may be the only person listening to her. Ann Todd is equally effective as the stepmother with unclear intentions. Douglas Slocum's stark black-and-white cinematography adds to the suspense, using shadows to conceal vital details until the right moment. Jimmy Sangster's script delivers layered twists that feel deliberate rather than forced, placing the film in the same tradition as Diabolique, but giving it its own identity. Scream of Fear stands as one of Hammer's strongest non-supernatural productions. Corruption, 1968. Peter Cushing takes a rare villainous turn in this intense thriller about a surgeon whose fiancée is injured during a heated argument involving a malfunctioning photography device. Driven by guilt, he becomes convinced that experimental treatments using pituitary material can temporarily restore her appearance. His desperation pushes him into increasingly reckless acts, targeting strangers to continue the procedures. Director Robert Hartford Davis places the story in a modern London filled with fashion shoots, parties, and shifting social norms. Cushing plays against his usual heroic persona, portraying a man whose good intentions disintegrate into obsession. His gradual unraveling is one of the film's most effective elements. Sue Lloyd plays the fiancée with ambiguity, grateful for the treatments yet torn by what they cost. The film keeps her awareness intentionally vague, allowing multiple interpretations of her involvement. The supporting cast reflects the era's London youth culture, contrasting sharply with the clinical horror of the doctor's work. Corruption stands out for its bold approach and Cushing's committed performance. Though modestly budgeted, it reflects a moment when British thrillers were pushing toward more modern and confrontational storytelling. Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory, 1961. This early 60s Italian thriller blends creature feature elements with a mystery set at a reform school for young women. When a student is found dead under suspicious circumstances suggesting an animal attack, tensions rise between staff members, students, and recent arrivals, any of whom could be hiding something. A new teacher becomes entangled in the investigation, as accusations spread and more danger follows. Director Paolo Hoish emphasizes suspense over explicit effects, keeping the werewolf mostly concealed until key moments. While the creature makeup is modest, the gloomy atmosphere and nighttime chases compensate for the limited budget. The boarding school setting provides dark hallways, forested grounds, and an air of paranoia. The young cast brings more dimension than expected, avoiding the stereotypes common in similar productions. The adult staff, each with their own motivations, form a convincing set of potential suspects, maintaining uncertainty until the final reveal. The film treats its werewolf mythology in classic terms, relying on curses and lunar triggers rather than disease or infection. This traditional approach supports its mystery structure, keeping viewers focused on identifying the creature rather than rethinking the rules. Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory stands as an enjoyable blend of Gothic atmosphere and early 60s Euro thriller style. The Reptile, 1966, Hammer offered something unusual with this creature feature, set in a remote Cornish village where unexplained deaths leave victims with darkened skin and no clear cause. A young couple who move into a nearby cottage discover their reclusive neighbor is hiding a tragic secret. His daughter has been forced into a transformative state that periodically turns her into a snake-like creature, with no memory of her actions afterward. Director John Gilling uses the foggy rural setting to build tension, emphasizing superstition, isolation, and fear of the unknown. The film hides the creature for much of its runtime, relying on eerie aftermaths and gradual clues until the final reveal. Roy Ashton's makeup effects are striking and distinctive. Jacqueline Pierce gives the cursed daughter a sympathetic presence, portraying someone torn between her normal life and something she can't control. Noel Willman brings gravitas to the father, trying desperately to contain the situation. Ray Barrett and Jennifer Daniel provide grounding as the couple slowly piecing the mystery together. Hints of a Malaysian backstory and the father's past involvement with unfamiliar rituals add subtle commentary about colonial guilt and cultural misunderstandings, giving the film more depth than its surface premise suggests. The Reptile remains one of Hammer's most unique monster creations, combining strong atmosphere with emotional undertones. The Psychopath, 1966. Freddie Francis directs this amicus thriller about a string of murders tied together by a chilling signature. Dolls dressed to resemble each victim are left at the scene. A Scotland Yard inspector uncovers links between the victims, all connected to unresolved events from the Second World War. The trail leads to a reclusive former actress, confined to a wheelchair, and her emotionally fragile son, who maintains a troubling collection of dolls. Written by Robert Bloch, the script examines psychological dependency and long-buried resentment. The dolls operate as both clues and symbols, growing more disturbing as the narrative unfolds. Each death ties back to old grievances, giving the story a revenge-driven undercurrent. Patrick Wymark plays the inspector with grounded determination, while Margaret Johnston gives the mother a controlling theatrical presence. John Standing portrays the son with unnerving subtlety, leaving his true nature in question for much of the film. Francis uses lighting and framing to make the doll workshop feel increasingly oppressive, and the London setting adds atmosphere without overshadowing the mystery. The film remains focused on tension rather than explicit violence, demonstrating the studio's range beyond their anthology films. Castle of Blood, 1964. Italian Gothic horror reaches peak atmosphere in this story of a journalist who accepts a wager to spend the night in a supposedly haunted castle where several people once lost their lives. As the night passes, he encounters the spirits of the castle's former residents. Not traditional ghosts, but figures trapped in a cycle of replaying their final moments. Their survival depends on drawing new victims into the pattern. Antonio Margheriti, with uncredited work by Sergio Corbucci, creates an elegant visual style, using black and white photography to enhance the castle's decayed and shadow-filled interiors. Barbara Steele contributes her signature intensity, portraying one of the spectral figures with a blend of allure and sorrow. Her presence alone elevates the film's emotional tone. Georges Rivière plays the journalist, whose skepticism gradually dissolves as the supernatural becomes undeniable. Each apparition represents a different form of Gothic tragedy, giving the castle a layered and melancholy history. The film explores ghostly existence as a kind of purgatory. The spirits are bound to the castle not out of malice, but because their violent pasts anchor them there. This philosophical angle gives the story greater weight than a typical haunting. Castle of Blood remains one of the most atmospheric and visually refined Gothic films of the 1960s. Berserk, 1967. Joan Crawford headlines this circus set thriller as Monica Rivers, a ringmaster whose struggling show suddenly attracts attention when performers begin dying in stage-like mishaps. As the tragedies continue, the question becomes whether these are accidents, sabotage, or the work of a hidden killer. The circus community, full of rivalries and grudges, gives investigators plenty of suspects. Crawford delivers a commanding performance, portraying Monica as confident, calculating, and focused on keeping the circus afloat, even as danger surrounds her. Ty Harden co-stars as a charismatic new performer whose arrival coincides with the turmoil, raising suspicion about his motives. Director Jim O'Connelly uses real circus acts to heighten authenticity, staging sequences that blur the line between performance and peril. The film's set pieces, from tightrope acts to knife-throwing displays, provide natural tension, and the deaths are presented without graphic detail, relying instead on timing and atmosphere. With its carnival setting, colorful visuals, and Crawford's presence, Berserk fits comfortably within the grand dame thriller trend of the era. It's modest but engaging entertainment that uses its circus backdrop to deliver a steady stream of suspense. The 1960s gave us the last great Gothic horror cycle, before the genre transformed into something grittier and more explicit. These films represent craftsmanship, atmosphere, and the understanding that suggestion could be just as powerful as showing everything. Shadows instead of splatter, dread instead of shock. Some of these remain obscure despite coming from prestigious studios. Others have been rediscovered by audiences hungry for classical horror done right. But they all capture a specific moment when horror still valued elegance alongside terror, when monster movies and psychological thrillers could coexist on the same studio lot. If you love Gothic atmosphere, practical creature effects, and horror that trusted its audience's imagination, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know which 60s horror gem still haunts you. Thanks for watching. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.